who is the worst murderer of the 20th century, this seemingly simple question delves into the complex labyrinth of human depravity, where the answer cannot be considered within just a singular attribution, in the shadowy realm of criminality. While some perpetrators operate in solitary operation, others are enshrouded by a network of accomplices. Without this collusion, their capacity to inflict harm would not be so widespread. Consider first the chilling case of Richard Ramirez, the infamous Night Stalker who acted alone. During the tumultuous mid-1980s, Ramirez struck fear into the hearts of Southern Californians, leaving a trail of brutal assaults, rapes, and murders in his wake. His reign of terror was solitary, his atrocities carried out alone, leaving at least 13 dead in his wake. Now consider another criminal figure who operated with many accomplices in Europe and in particular during World War II, and we encounter a figure whose name reverberates with dread across the globe: Adolf Hitler. Amidst the vast tapestry of his crimes, it becomes obvious that attributing the staggering loss of life solely to his singular will is a grievous oversimplification. Hitler, though a formidable force, could not orchestrate the horrors alone. However, without his grip on power, the machinery of mass murder may not have operated with such relentless efficiency. Hitler's authority empowered those complicit in the slaughter, their compliance fueling his monstrous ambitions. Therefore, the quest to identify the very worst murderers of the 20th century transcends the confines of individuality. It demands an examination of the intricate web of collaborators, supporters, and the tumultuous political and societal conditions that fostered such atrocities. It is within these broader contexts that the true depth of human depravity is laid bare. So, who stands as the ultimate embodiment of mass murder in the 20th century? Join us as we embark on a journey through history's darkest chapters, exploring the interconnected threads that shape the destiny of nations and the course of humanity itself. We will review the 10 most notorious figures of the 20th century, and with the 10th one we'll delve deeper into their crimes and the societal conditions that enabled their reigns of terror. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Also, leave a comment down below about what you would like to watch next, and I will do my best to provide content you guys want to know about. Now back to today's content. Yakubu Gowon, he was responsible for the Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, between 1967 to 1970, and led to the devastating loss of approximately 1.1 million lives. The dead included an estimated 100,000 soldiers and 1 million civilians. The war, triggered by the secession of the eastern region under Chukwu Emeka Odumegwu Ojukwu and its declaration as the Republic of Biafra, involved complex ethnic, political, and economic factors. While the conflict ultimately led to the defeat of Biafra and its reintegration into Nigeria, it had devastating consequences for the entire nation. Mengistu Haile Mariam, dubbed as the Ethiopian Red Terror, occurring between 1976 and 1978, remains a deeply painful chapter in the nation's history. This period of intense political violence aimed to suppress dissent against the ruling Derg regime, led by Mengistu Haile Mariam. While attributing exact responsibility is complex, this campaign resulted in the tragic deaths of hundreds of thousands of Ethiopians. Fueled by a power struggle within the Derg and ideological clashes, the Red Terror targeted anyone deemed an opponent, leading to arbitrary arrests, torture, and mass executions. Ethnic and political affiliations often determined who was persecuted, with intellectuals, students, and activists bearing the brunt of the violence. Among the atrocities committed were systematic executions, public displays of brutality, and forced disappearances. Horrific stories emerged of Kebelese, local committees involved in identifying and detaining victims, often demanding wasted bullet fees from families for the return of loved ones' bodies. Kim Il-sung's 46-year rule of North Korea remains a deeply controversial and sensitive topic. While attributing responsibility for historical events involving human suffering is complex, his leadership coincided with significant hardship for the North Korean people. Emerging from the Korean War's devastation, North Korea faced immense economic challenges. Kim Il-sung established a strict socialist system, centralizing control and prioritizing rapid industrialization. This approach yielded mixed results, with some arguing it modernized the nation, while others highlight persistent shortages and economic woes. During his rule, political dissent was harshly suppressed. Purges targeting perceived opponents fueled fear and instability. Estimates of those affected and lost vary considerably, adding to the historical complexity. Additionally, famines in the 1990s exacerbated hardships, with the exact causes and responsibility still debated. While tensions with the U.S. played a significant role in shaping North Korea's foreign policy, blaming external actors alone ignores the internal dynamics and choices made by the regime. Pol Pot, leader of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia from 1975 to 1979, remains a deeply painful chapter marked by immense human suffering. While attributing responsibility for such catastrophic events is complex, his leadership tragically coincided with the deaths of an estimated 1.7 to 2.5 million Cambodians. The 1984 Hollywood film called Killing Fields was based on the conflict. Driven by an extreme, radical communist ideology, Pol Pot sought to establish an agrarian utopia through radical social engineering. This included the forced relocation of millions from cities to rural communes, aiming for agrarian collectivization. However, this policy, driven by ideology rather than practicality, led to widespread hunger and hardship. Beyond mass relocations, the Khmer Rouge regime under Pol Pot instituted brutal policies with devastating consequences. Political dissent was ruthlessly suppressed, often resulting in summary executions. Ethnic minorities and intellectuals were particularly targeted, fueling fears and paranoia. Additionally, inadequate food supplies and limited medical care further exacerbated the harsh living conditions for many. Ismail Enver Pasha during the Ottoman era and its ethnic persecutions. The early 20th century marked a period of immense suffering for numerous ethnic groups within the Ottoman Empire. The Armenian Genocide, along with the persecution of Greek and Assyrian communities, remain deeply painful chapters in history. While attributing sole responsibility for such complex events is insensitive and inaccurate, recognizing their occurrence and understanding the broader context is crucial. Political instability, ethnic tensions, and the pressures of World War I contributed to a climate of violence and persecution. While assigning specific death tolls or blaming individuals oversimplifies these tragedies, the systematic targeting of these communities is undeniable. The Armenian Genocide, recognized by numerous countries and scholars, saw the targeted killings and displacements of Armenians on a horrific scale. Similarly, the persecution of Greek and Assyrian communities involved massacres, forced deportations, and immense suffering. Hideki Tojo and his role in World War II remains a subject of intense scrutiny and debate. While holding influential positions Prime Minister and Minister of War, he advocated for militaristic expansion. And under the complex historical tapestry on which this tragedy unfolded, many suffered. Japan's aggression stemmed from a multitude of factors. Decades of humiliation after Western imperialism fueled nationalist fervor. Economic anxieties and resource scarcity pushed expansionist desires. The rise of militarism and its influence on the political landscape created an environment conducive to war. It's crucial to understand these broader forces as they were the backdrop that led to Hideki Tojo pushing forward relentlessly. Tojo's actions undoubtedly added fuel to the fire. His unwavering support for militarism led to harsh domestic policies and, ultimately, the attack on Pearl Harbor. His leadership undoubtedly shaped wartime decisions and contributed to the suffering inflicted. Ultimately, Tojo was held accountable for his actions. Tried and convicted for war crimes, including aggression and inhumane treatment of prisoners, his fate acknowledged the atrocities committed. Leopold II and the Congo Free State. The atrocities committed in the Congo Free State under Leopold II of Belgium remain a deeply painful chapter in African history. Leopold II, driven by colonial ambitions and economic aspiration, established the Congo Free State in 1885. Unlike other European colonies, it functioned as his personal territory, separate from the Belgian state. This allowed him to exploit the vast resources of the region with minimal oversight. Forced labor became the backbone of the Free State's economy, particularly focused on rubber production. The brutal system targeted the indigenous population, utilizing violence, coercion, and mutilation as tools of control. Estimates of deaths caused by this exploitation range from 2 to 15 million, highlighting the tragic human cost of this colonial endeavor. Ultimately, the international outcry against the abuses in the Congo Free State led to significant reforms and, later, the Belgian government's annexation of the territory. Yet, the scars of this period remain etched in the history of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Adolf Hitler, the Holocaust and World War II stand as devastating chapters in human history, marked by immense suffering and loss of life. Hitler became leader of the Nazi Party and rose to unprecedented power in Germany amidst societal anxieties and deep economic turmoil. Exploiting these vulnerabilities, he promoted fervent nationalism and scapegoated minorities, particularly Jews, stoking hatred and fear. His appointment as Chancellor in 1933 marked the beginning of the Third Reich, characterized by authoritarian control and aggressive expansionism. Fueled by militaristic ideologies and territorial ambitions, Nazi Germany initiated World War II, engulfing Europe in conflict. This resulted in widespread devastation, displacing millions and claiming countless lives. Tragically, the Nazi regime engaged in systematic persecution and mass murder, targeting not only Jews but also Roma, political opponents, and other groups deemed undesirable. Estimates suggest millions were systematically killed, leaving an indelible mark on human history. Joseph Stalin. He was the first secretary of the Communist Party from 1920 to 1953. After Lenin's death in 1924, he became the leader of the Soviet Union. He implemented rapid economic reforms aimed at modernization. However, these policies, including collectivization of agriculture, had unintended consequences. Food production suffered, and severe famines, including the devastating Holodomor in Ukraine, resulted in millions of deaths. Furthermore, the Great Purge of the late 1930s, a period of intense political repression, targeted suspected opponents of Stalin's regime. This resulted in widespread arrests, executions, and disappearances, leaving profound scars on Soviet society. Estimates on the total number of casualties within Soviet Ukraine range from 2.6 million to 10 million. During the late 1930s, Stalin launched another wonderfully titled initiative called the Great Purge, also known as the Great Terror. It was a paranoid campaign to kill off the people who opposed him, and his targets were often executed. In 1939, Stalin agreed to a non-aggression pact with the Nazis. Eventually, Germany violated the pact, the Soviet Union joined the Allies, and they racked up 23.9 million deaths, the largest death toll in the war. Mao Zedong. Under his rule, there were between 49 million and 78 million deaths in China. As we have now identified the worst cases and reached the worst one in terms of the number of people affected, let's Take an in-depth look at Teddy Tales. Mao Zedong infamously used societal policies such as policy reforms like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, with anyone not conforming being tortured and put to death, and are surely two of the most ill-fated, poorly named initiatives ever. The first was an effort to rapidly industrialize China. His focus was on making China a premier exporter of steel, and to this end he asked everybody to make it. The problem was it got many citizens to make smelting shops in their backyards. Not only was the steel of little value, but it was made from everything lying around the house, including their own cooking supplies. Without the tools to make food, no money coming in from the steel, and no money to survive, this resulted in much of the population starving to death. The estimates on this single program on its own is around 20 million deaths. It begs the question, why would such a leader be ever able to get back into power after such misery? Unfortunately, he managed to influence his way back into power again after only a short time. In the early 1960s, Mao Zedong initiated the socialist education movement in China. The movement aimed to address perceived ideological issues within the Communist Party and broader society. It focused on political and economic reforms, as well as promoting socialist values. While the movement had some intended results, it also resulted in tensions and social unrest. Contributing to the complex political landscape of the time, he aimed the concept at young ones who would eventually wrestle the power away from the older guard. By 1960, for this movement was renamed the Four Cleanups Movement, whose goal was cleansing politics, economics, ideas, and organization of reactionaries. This led to the formation of the Red Guards, who were organized to punish intellectuals and take out Mao's political adversaries. The Cultural Revolution was now underway, and its overriding mission was to abolish old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. Something Mao fervently believed in was that destruction and chaos could bring rebirth. Mao Zedong instructed his followers to destroy buildings, sacred objects, talk back to one's elders, punish them, turn them in, and kill those who did not agree. By 1968, things were starting to look pretty good for Mao all over again. And so he put into place the decade-long down to the countryside movement, which forced young intellectuals to move out to the country to become farmers. Sadly, the people he pushed out there were the same Red Guards who had helped him get power. Estimates of the death toll are between 40,000 and 7 million depending on source. Finally, there is the 100 Flowers Movement 1956 to 1957 in China. Intellectuals and others were initially encouraged to express their opinions and critiques towards the government. However, the campaign later shifted as the government perceived growing criticism as a threat to its authority. Subsequently, hundreds of thousands of individuals deemed rightists faced various forms of persecution. Mao Zedong's policies and political purges from 1949 to 1976 resulted in the deaths of between 49 and 78 million people. The vast, cruel, deliberate extinction of millions. Historian Frank Dichter, renowned for his groundbreaking book Mao's Great Famine, recently penned an article in History Today, providing a concise summary of the catastrophic events that unfolded during Mao Zedong's regime. Mao, driven by the ambition to propel China ahead of its competitors, embarked on a radical agenda involving forced relocations of villagers into massive people's communes. In the pursuit of a utopian vision, everything from work and homes to land and belongings was communalized, stripping individuals of their autonomy and livelihoods. Under this regime, food became a tool of control, rationed according to perceived merit, while incentives for labor were removed, leading to coercion and violence to compel starving farmers into poorly planned projects, resulting in neglect of crucial crops. The consequences were devastating, with historians estimating tens of millions perishing from starvation. Only recently have reports surfaced, ironically kept by the Communist Party itself, shedding light on the full extent of the tragedy. Mao's actions make him one of the greatest mass murderers of the 20th century, responsible for the deaths of at least 45 million people between 1958 and 1962. The human cost of this period is immeasurable, with millions falling victim to even the slightest perceived infraction. Dichter's work has revealed that the mass murder was intentional, involving widespread executions and torture, rather than solely starvation. Despite this grim reality, the atrocities of the Great Leap Forward are often overlooked outside of scholarly circles, lacking the societal impact seen in remembrance of events like the Holocaust. While discussions surrounding Mao's regime are complex, the sheer scale of the atrocities warrants greater recognition and reflection. Comparisons to other historical atrocities, while challenging, emphasize the need for a more informed dialogue on this critical period in Chinese history. In an age where information is readily accessible, it is essential to confront uncomfortable truths and ensure that the atrocities of the past are not forgotten or diminished, while acknowledging other historical tragedies, such as the Holocaust. We must also recognize the immense suffering inflicted by Mao's regime and strive to ensure that it receives the attention and understanding it deserves in our collective memory. Why we so rarely look back on the Great Leap Forward? What are the reasons accounting for this ignorance? One factor is most of the victims were Chinese peasants, and generally speaking, it is easier to empathize with victims who seem similar to ourselves. A larger factor, the general tendency to downplay crimes committed by communist regimes, as opposed to right-wing authoritarians. Very few Western intellectuals actually sympathize with communism. However, there is reluctance to fully accept what a great evil it was. Fearing discussion may lead to left-wing curiosity that maybe it could be bettered if adopted by them. In China, the regime has in recent years been forced to admit Mao made what they term as mistakes and opened some dialogue of it. But the government is off-limits to acknowledging mass murder was the intention. To this day, accessional suppression and persecution is applied to anyone who should dare to discuss the truth. This reluctance is the elephant in the room, pointing to the Communist Party still ruling with coercion in China to this day. Why it matters? No matter whether it is in Chinese or in Western societies, failing to recognize the true extent of the Great Leap Forward comes with significant consequences. It's important to consider there are survivors of this tragic period still living today, and their unimaginable experiences with suffering and loss demand greater acknowledgement and recognition toward the atrocities they were forced to endure. Providing some form of suitable compensation to address their suffering and loss should be considered essential, along with pursuing justice against those responsible for their plight. Moreover, the undeniable blind spot regarding the historical crimes committed by Mao and other communist leaders leads to a downplaying of the actual horrors of their regimes and does little to prevent similar occurrences in the future. Recent events in Venezuela, where forced labor has been mandated by the socialist government, exemplify this dangerous trend. Many news reports fail to mention the socialist nature of the government's policies, and the parallels with historical regimes like the Soviet Union and China are often ignored. Some analyses argue that the issue lies not solely in socialism itself, but rather in Venezuela's particular brand of socialism, which combines flawed economic strategies with tendencies towards authoritarianism and mismanagement. It's essential to recognize that traits like strongman bullying and mismanagement are not unique to any specific ideology. Nonetheless, they are rather common features of various socialist states worldwide. Contrary to popular belief, countries like those in Scandinavia, often touted as successful examples of socialism, do not strictly adhere to socialist principles, as they lack government ownership of the means of production and have relatively free markets compared to many Western nations. In conclusion, it is evident that the lessons from history, particularly those such as the Great Leap Forward policy and the ongoing struggles in Venezuela, are crucial for acknowledging that such situations with their complexities and pitfalls are a big part of what leads to mass murders and similarly horrendous treatment of citizens. Failing to recognize the suffering of survivors, downplaying the atrocities committed, and ignoring the warning signs of authoritarianism and mismanagement only perpetuate cycles of oppression and injustice. It is imperative that we recognize these issues, not only by acknowledging past injustices, but also by actively working towards preventing their recurrence in the future. By learning from history and fostering a deeper understanding of the implications of political ideologies, we can strive towards a more just and equitable society for all. It is crucial that we acknowledge and confront history's most significant instances of mass violence with the attention and seriousness they deserve.
Thank you for listening. Please join me next time when we will delve into another episode.